Hey, what's going on, guys? My name is Jake, also known as Freezing the Mind, and today I have an interview with a very special guest. Please introduce yourself.
Hey Jake, this is Dr. Lava.
Awesome. Very nice to have you, Dr. Lava. For those of you who don't know Dr. Lava, Dr. Lava pretty much uncovers different uncut beta versions and just really interesting things about Pokemon games that you wouldn't ordinarily know or find. He finds very rare information, and it's so cool. I mean, just an example is like the beta Pokemon from Gen 2, when that was such a, you know, when I was really bustling around social media, Dr. Lava was right on it. So I'm very honored to have you today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Happy to do it. Thanks for having me, Jake.
Absolutely. All right, so let's get it rolling. So, the first question I have is what is the inspiration behind the name Dr. Lava?
We were talking before the recording about me living in that small Chinese town, Yangshuo. And at the time, me and a British friend of mine, Dave, this has nothing to do with Pokemon, by the way. It
That's
kind of
all.
takes some twists and turns.
That's all right.
But we were really into Alien and Predator movies. We would just kind of get drunk and watch them over and over again. And I used to have a YouTube channel where I did drone modifications, and that's kind of how I ended up in China, was through the drone business. And but I hadn't been doing it for a while, and so I'd say, oh, we should make a YouTube channel about Alien and Predator, and we should have some kind of on-screen characters. And we went kind of surfing over the internet to try to find some ideas for on-screen avatars, and we ended up finding uh, some American Girl dolls that were in wheelchairs.
Oh,
And
okay.
for some reason, it's just, I don't know, we were drunk. We just thought it was really funny to see these American Girl dolls and crutches and wheelchairs pushing each other around in wheelchairs, and we're just like, a doll in a wheelchair, like that is something I've never seen before. That's what we should do. Like, no one else is already doing dolls in wheelchairs. And so he's British, so we decided he should be like an evil scientist, and I'm from Arkansas, and I've got a bit of a southern accent, so which I used to be a flag salesman, so I can really play out my southern accent. So we decided I would be like a disgruntled Vietnam vet in a wheelchair, kind of like Tom Cruise and Born on the Fourth of July, or maybe more people are actually more familiar with a parody of that, which is on that show It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
Right.
There's an episode where Charlie is a disgruntled Vietnam vet. I don't know if you've seen that,
I've
but
yeah.
basically I was going to be that, and he was going to be Dr. Lava, and then uh, try things took some twists and turns. Just to sum it up, about 2 years. That didn't. We made a Rick and Morty theory video. I tried to make a cartoon based around Dr. Lava, kind of like kind of like Robot Chicken or something,
Oh, okay.
where Dr. Lava is the. Have you heard the? Are you familiar with the flat Earth conspiracy theory?
Yes.
So Dr. Lava was like the captain of the United Nations guards that hide the flat Earth at the edge of, or hide the ice wall at the edge of flat Earth.
Oh,
He was
okay.
kind of like a Darth Vader character who was, yeah, captain of the guards, and he was evil, and just hiding the ice wall. He had a base on the ice wall, and I made that with little 3D graphics and all that, but that never ended up actually getting completed. And then, in long story short, I ended up just kind of talking about Pokemon
Cool.
after a couple of years. So
That's
yeah, it didn't end up the way it started, but that's where it is. That's where it ended up leading to.
that's awesome. So, with that said, is there any like so what was the inspiration behind like did here's a better way of wording it. Did you just come up with like what's on your Twitter profile picture and banner? Like, did you just kind of imagine that that's what your character would look like, or did you kind of draw any particular inspiration for that design?
Uh, there's actually that my banner is the one with me face to face with a giant Curum. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
It was actually someone did that for me. Austin, I apologize. I haven't talked to him in a long time. I forget his last name, but an artist named Austin, um, who I sent him a picture of that Lord of the Rings scene where there's Gandalf versus the Balrog.
Yes. Yes.
Um, and I asked him if he could just kind of do that same kind of thing, but with Akiram instead of the Balrog and Dr. Lava instead of Gandalf, and that's what he sent back to me. And it's just, yeah, it's been my banner for a year or so.
That's awesome. I love it. Um, so, as you mentioned before, I mean, you started with all different types of things. You know, making drone videos, and then making like even a Rick and Morty video, and then finally unused Pokemon content. So, what sparked your interest in finding unused Pokemon content?
Well, I've always been, since I grew up in the 90s, born in 1988. And so I was about 11 years old when Pokemon fever swept through America. So I was the perfect age to get caught up in that when it first hit. And so, yeah, I've been a Pokemon fan since I was, since Gen 1 came out when I was about 11 years old in the late 90s. And then, yeah, I was a Pokemon fan for years. I got kind of a bit out of the series when I was living in China for a few years because they don't really have Pokemon here.
Mm-hmm.
And I got back into it a few years ago, and it was about the time there was all these like the Space World leak, the Gold and Silver 1997 demo.
Mm-hmm.
And shout out here, there's a Team Space World documented that demo originally. There's another group called Helix Chamber, who I want to shout out. I think a lot of people who know who I am probably know who they are as well, but maybe some people don't. They've got a blog. I think they've only put out maybe about 15 articles over the last 2 years or so. But most of them are just really insightful with a lot of research. I think they've got a team of people. I think it's 5 core members and then some kind of part-time members, just analyzing and documenting and finding old Pokemon books and stuff like that, and having going through it with a scanner and a micro lens and enhancing. It's like on those movies where, like those 90s movies where you've got the guy with the computer and the satellite image or whatever. He's like, "What's that?" Zoom in, enhance,
Right.
enhance it again. And so they've got a guy who basically does that. And they've got several people who speak Japanese. And so they did, they're not as active now as they were a couple of years ago, but they just put out a few articles that were just really awesome at doing that kind of stuff. And it sort of inspired me to, at the time I was just covering general Nintendo cut content. And then I ended up getting into Pokemon, and it's really kind of looking up to those guys. Those folks. It's not all dudes, and yeah, I was inspired by Helix Chamber, and time went by, and they ended up getting involved in some controversy when there was a Gen 1 leak, February 2019, and they haven't been as active since then because they got kind of dragged on the internet. It's a long story I won't go into, but yeah, I guess I would say I was inspired by Helix Chambers, especially their early days of documentation a couple of years back. And since then, the last couple of years or so, I've been kind of doing the same thing. For a while, it was kind of, my dream was that they would invite me into their club, but I don't think it's ever going to happen. I think they actually don't like me very much for the most part. But yeah, that's I was inspired by Helix Chamber and Team Space World, and I don't speak Japanese. So I pay people to translate stuff for me, and a lot of what I do is I work with other people who are a lot smarter than I am. Mostly, a lot of the time, I just try to kind of connect disparate parts of the fan base, like an artist and a translator and other folks, and just kind of try to, I wouldn't say manage a team, because I don't want to sound like I'm managing anybody, but just try to connect with people and translate some old interviews. And there's an artist, it's a Helix Chambers artist who I work with a lot. Racy Beep is her online name. She makes really great Sugimori style watercolor. And she kind of recreates a lot of those lost Pokemon sprites in the Sugimori style watercolor. So a lot of it is just paying her to kind of recreate some of these lost Pokemon and stuff like that, because you can tweet an unused sprite and people will kind of like it, but if you tweet that unused sprite with a really accurate Ken Sugimori style watercolor, as if it had actually been a Pokemon that made it into the game, people don't like to use their imaginations on the internet. They like to go ahead and just have it right there and not have to imagine what if it got watercolor artwork. And so Rachel Briggs is her real name. She's really good at that. And so a lot of it's just hunting down old magazines and paying translators or paying Rachel and just trying to make everything as simple as possible and find old stuff and make it as easily accessible to folks as possible.
That's awesome. Well, well said. I think in some ways you probably don't give yourself enough credit because, you have a very, big following. And then also you just recently, I mean, I don't know if it's recent now, but within time, relatively, you just joined Did You Know Gaming, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, about 2 months ago.
Right. So, I mean, I think the fact that they recognized you and they have you on board now is really something. Because obviously you're really good at what you do. And I'm one of those people that oh my gosh, I always have this issue that the people I interview I tend to gush on because I love their content, but I won't do that this interview. So I'll just,
well, I mean, you can if you want to. Oh my gosh. Kidding.
So I'll leave it at that. But yeah. So actually, that reminds me. How long have you been like? Yeah, no. How long have you been finding unused content in Pokemon games?
I think just about 2 years. Although to be fair, the first 6 months or so, I was mostly just, I guess, like sort of covering other people's research in YouTube videos, which is something I've tried to stop doing as much as possible because it's not a particularly, in my opinion, honorable way to be a YouTuber, is just to find other stuff people have written and then just make a YouTube video and kind of be a glory hog for the people who most people don't like to read, and they'd rather watch a 5-minute or 10-minute YouTube video than read a really long article or go to the cutting room floor or something. So early on, what I was doing was kind of going to TCRF or Helix Chambers website and then just being like, oh, like I've made a YouTube video just kind of summarizing other people's work. Like I said, I was and still am a big Helix Chamber fan. But yeah, it's really just been the last year and maybe year and a half or so that I've really tried to, I mean, on Twitter, I still cover other people's work, but when I make YouTube videos, just try to, as much as possible, just deal with new translations that I've commissioned or the research that I've done. So I guess I would say, how long have I actively been searching for Pokemon lost content? Original work on my own, I'd say, maybe just over a year.
Oh wow, okay. Awesome. So with that said, from what you've been telling me, you got to pay translators and it sounds like it's a very, big process. But which Pokemon game of like the core series, which Pokemon game has been the most difficult to find cut, beta, or unused content for?
Well, that's a little bit of a complicated question. So when I got into this field, the Gold and Silver 1997 demo had already leaked, and a lot of information been uncovered, and so that work was pretty much already done. Um, and then not too long after, maybe 6 months after I'd been doing this, and um, there was a Gen 1 leak, which came from the same hack of Nintendo servers, but it kind of the stuff that got hacked was just kind of leaked drop by drop into the public eye. It's a Helix Chamber published the Gen 1 stuff, which was back sprites along with some other assets. So they pretty much covered a lot of the Gen 1 stuff. So Gen 1 and 2, those folks, Team Space World and Helix Chamber, already did a pretty good job, a really good job on Generation 1 and 2. Generation 3, there was a 2002 demo exhibited at an event called Festa in Japan. It's called the traveling event. The screenshots show there are some beta sprites, but that is yet to leak. It's unclear if that was part of what got hacked and has slowly leaked over the last couple of years. But just recently there was some stuff that leaked out of Gen 3, but not a huge collection of lost Pokemon like there was in Gen 1 and 2. But Gen 5, Generation 5 is a generation that's been mostly neglected by the folks like Helix Chamber, Team Space World. And so I've focused a lot of my efforts on Generation 5 just because there weren't other people already doing it. So, for example, about a year ago, I found some, with the help of another shout out, with the help of a Bulbapedia moderator named Snorlax Monster. He kind of helped tip me off to the fact that these magazines exist. So there's a magazine in Japan called Nintendo Dream, which is kind of like our version of what used to be Nintendo Power, except that Nintendo Dream still exists. And in late 2010, early 2011, they had Ken Sugimori, the Pokemon art director, along with Takao Uno. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing their names. Sorry.
That's
and
right.
And who was the third guy? Slipping my mind. Another Pokemon designer. The three of them came and explained the design origins of about 104 of the 156 Gen 5 Pokemon. So they said, this Pokemon was inspired by this, and this is what we were thinking, and this is the design. For example, the height. I mispronounce Pokemon. I just do it. Sorry, but so I think it's Hydreigon.
Yeah, the three-headed dark dragon Pokemon. Yeah.
Right. So in these interviews, like I said, they cover about 100 Pokemon, but just a good example is the Hydreigon family. They say that originally, in these Japanese magazines that I ended up having translated, so they say that the Hydreigon family was originally a family of tank dragons, but the kind of the higher ups, I think the game's planners didn't accept it's not entirely clear who rejected it, but basically they came up with this family of tank dragons. The designs were rejected, so they put them on ice for a while, and then later orders came down from the game's planners, who I think they mean Masuda when they say that. Orders came down for a powerful 3-stage dragon family, and so they resurrected these tank dragons and reworked them. And they go on to say that Hydreigon at one point had 8 heads, like the Yamada no Orochi, which is like a mythical 8-headed dragon from Japanese mythology. And then it was kind of the design was too busy. Essentially, there's too much going on, so they cut it down to just 3 heads on Hydreigon. But they go on to say that elements of those old designs still exist in the final design. So Xylus and Hydreigon both have kind of like purple tread marks on their underbellies,
Hmm.
and those are leftovers from when they were tanks. And also that Hydreigon has these on each side has three, I don't know what to call them, three things pointing out on his sides, and so he's got six kind of, I don't know, spikes or whatever coming out from his back. And so they say that he used to have 8 heads, but now if you look at his silhouette, he's got his 3 heads plus those 6 appendages. So his silhouette actually looks like he's got 9 heads, which, as Ken Sugimori says, is one better than Yamada no Orochi. So it's just interesting to hear the design process and how how they used to be that, and then they become something else, but elements of those old ideas still exist in their final designs, and they do that for about 100 Gen 5 Pokemon. And they also mention some Pokemon that were scrapped entirely, and so I paid a translator to translate all those interviews, and I also hired Rachel Briggs, the artist, to recreate some of those lost Pokemon designs. And that was a bit of hunting and translating and all that for Gen 5 that needed doing. There's another event. There's an in-game event called the Lock Capsule event, which was originally meant to connect Heart Gold, Soul Silver to Black and White. So you basically, they were going to distribute a key item called the Lock Capsule, which you could get on your Heart Gold, Soul Silver, and then you would use what's it called? It's slipping my mind, but basically there's an in-game mechanic that would allow you to transfer it over to Black and White. And then there's a clown in the Game Freak building who, in the final build, he just says something like, "Oh, I'm a clown. I'm Mr. Locke. I can open anything." But then he never actually does open anything. But what that's a reference to is that unused lock capsule. So you can actually, the whole event still exists in the game because they were planning on distributing that key item, but they never did. You can basically use a Game Shark to get that item into Heart Gold, Soul Silver, go through some steps, transfer it over to Black and White, take it to Mr. Locke, and he'll open the lock capsule. And there's a letter from the Sinnoh region as well. From Johto, as well as a TM50, which would have been the last TM, or TM75. Sorry, it's been a while. Anyway, it's the last TM in the collection, and a letter. And then there's also some dialogue about him being a sad clown. And anyway, that event had never been recorded on video, and so this is something else that needed doing, was just going through that event and recording it, and which is something else that I took a really long time. It was actually really difficult, but was able to document that lost event. So, there's just a lot of stuff like that, old magazines and bits of internal data that just kind of need to be unearthed and just throw a lot of time and sometimes some money at it to get it kind of restored.
That's awesome. So you would probably say that for you, at the very least, at Gen 5, finding information on that is pretty difficult, I'd imagine.
Well, I don't know if that's more difficult than anything else. It's just that no one else is really doing it.
Right.
And so it's to go back to your original question, what's the generation that's the most difficult to find lost content for? The older things become the easier it is. It's hard to find cut content for, let's say, Sword and Shield, because
right.
Junichi Masuda is not going around giving interviews about, oh, we almost did this, but then we didn't, or because it's still new. But once 20 years go by, the developers will maybe say, it's been 20 years. Well, we'll tell you some stuff that went on in the background, behind the scenes. So the newer the generation is, the harder it is to find that kind of information. But Generation 3 has been really difficult There's not been a lot that's come to light. Even after some recent leaks, there's still a lot that remains undiscovered. So to answer your question, I'd say Generation 3 is probably the least well documented. And there's been stuff that's leaked recently. There's been a couple of, I guess you'd call them disassemblers. A guy named, they're kind of online names. One guy is called Shiny Hunter Map. The other guy is called Retire Glitch. They're part of the, I hope I'm not getting this wrong, part of the Glitch City Laboratories community. They recently discovered an in-game event in Generation 4, just a small event. It was really conversation. In Generation 4, they found a whole bunch of other lost dialogue that reveals a little bit about the story that was scrapped. And so there's still people finding stuff in places just in the game's internal data that has been there all along for 15 years. And there's also, more stuff coming out from that hack from 3 years ago that's still leaking. It's there's always stuff coming to light. But Generation 3 has been a tough nut to crack.
Awesome. Okay. Nice. Now, I noticed recently, it's funny, I even went to the comments and some people were talking about it, on Instagram. You've been posting lots of content that has never quite made it to the United States. So it was exclusive to Japan. I believe it's a drawing book, and it has like specific information on Pokemon. And so what I wanted to know is, what is one piece of Japanese exclusive content that's obviously Pokemon related that you wish made a debut outside of Japan?
Well, there's this probably isn't the coolest, but it's probably one of the least well-known thing. It doesn't even have a Bulbapedia page, or in fact, if you Google it, the only person you'll find that's talking about it is myself, which I can't claim credit for because someone just told me about it recently. But it's there were these 3 Flash games that were on Yahoo, the Japanese version of Yahoo.com, but it was Yahoo Kids, so Japanese Yahoo Kids website. They were official Flash games just before the release of Generation 4. One was called Pokemon, the main one was called Pokemon Garden, and there's also Pokemon Sky Tower and Pokemon Maze Land. And they were essentially, I guess, they look like Generation 3 games. Describing them as mini games doesn't do them justice. I would say they're more like small, almost like small mainline games, at least in appearance. So, you're walking, if you look at it, it looks like Generation 3, but just like places in Generation 3 that you've never seen before.
Wow.
And those were only in Japan or on Japanese Yahoo Kids. And a friend of mine who goes by the name Darkshade, he's been trying to, he always wants me to be very careful about how I phrase this for trade, copyright reasons. He's trying to preserve these lost games, and the only way they can really be, the assets from these games can be harvested is people who played these games on their computers back about 15 years ago and still have those computers today and never cleared out their cache. Is it cache? C-A-C-H-E. I think it's actually pronounced cache. But anyway, they're the cache on their computer. And so I've been a few times over the last few weeks have kind of sent out tweets saying like, hey, check it out. Here's some images from these lost Pokemon games. If you played them 15 years ago, still have the same computer, please contact us. And you may still have those files in your computer. And a few people came forward and did have assets from those games still within their computers. It's been sitting there for 15 years. And so, Darkshade's trying to collect all the assets from those games so he can, again, I'm being careful about how I'm phrasing this, but so he can preserve those games and keep them alive. Being diplomatic here about the way I phrase it. Basically, save those games from being lost.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
you interpret that as you will, but uh, so yeah, there's a lot of Japanese books, especially one called Pokédex from 1996, which is a really awesome, basically Pokédex book with some great exclusive artwork and information in it. There's a lot of great books over the years, but those Pokemon Garden, Sky Tower, and Maze Land are really not well known at all, and really interesting. Just tiny mainline games is the best way I can think to describe them, and hopefully we'll be able to collect all the assets with the help from some, especially Japanese fans, and yeah, save them from being completely lost to time.
That's awesome. Well, I'm very excited to, hopefully hear some more about that soon. Um, See, like it's really amazing how a game that, you know, like a series that's been, established since essentially 1996, or really 1995, but has, just so much like lost content and content. I mean, we've never even heard about. Like, if I never heard about that until just now. That really is incredible. Just like how there's just all this lost stuff.
There's there's one more thing I'll tell you about. I shouldn't say the name of the game because it could possibly throw the thing into jeopardy, but I'll mention what it is without saying the name of the game. But so there's a Pokemon mini game that was exclusive to Japan that came out somewhere around 10 years ago. Don't have the exact year, but in front of me. But I should, but I don't. But there's a Pokemon mini game that was only released in Japan, and years have gone by, and now it's believed that there's only one guy who still actually has it. And he basically is what a lot of people would refer to as a hoarder. I don't know if that's fair or not, but basically he's got the game and he doesn't want to give it up.
Mm.
And people are in negotiations to try to trade him some other rare prototype game or something else to try to get him to give up what he's got. And the Pokemon minigame that he's got can then be released online for everyone to enjoy. And the negotiations, from what I'm being told by folks that I know, aren't going super well. And so it's funny that there's this Pokemon minigame that was Japan exclusive that whether or not you and the entire world actually gets to play it largely comes down to the mood of this one individual who's the only guy who has it. And yeah, it all comes down to his mood or possibly the negotiating skills of my friends. So yeah, that's the kind of weird stuff that goes on in the background regarding this kind of lost content. I'm sure all this stuff goes on in other video game series. I'm only really in the Pokemon community, but yeah, this is the way stuff gets done with lost video game content.
Awesome. So, my next question is, and it's actually it regards a newer Pokemon establishment. I know you've already actually expressed your views, and I think you expressed them really well, at least on Instagram. But so Pokemon Unite recently came out, which is essentially a people call it a League of Legends. I think the genre is specifically called a MOBA or a MOB. And
Yeah,
it's
I never had actually heard that term until last week. But yeah, the League of Legends style game. That's right.
And obviously, when you see the ratio of dislikes on the video to likes, you can see that there was a very obvious dislike for the release of this game. But and I completely admit myself, I was a little disappointed. But when you explained who it was targeted at, I think it made a lot more sense, and I think it um, is a lot more justifiable. But just in case people didn't see, that post, I wanted to know how do you feel about the newly released Pokemon Unite?
Well, I don't really, yeah, I don't really think it's for me. I've never played a MOBA in my entire life. I don't think, unless you count StarCraft. I don't think that counts as a MOBA, but um, in fact, I'm sure that it does not. Yeah, I've never played a MOBA. I probably won't play this new game just because it's not really my thing. But like as I was saying in that post, it makes total sense. It's probably a smart business move on the part of the Pokemon company. Um, I think there's probably a lot of Pokemon fans who feel disappointed or maybe even betrayed in some ways because they're worried about their data being shared or something like that. I don't know anything about that. I've lived in China for 10 years. The game is made in partnership with a company called Tencent, which is the largest tech company in China. As I said in the post, they're basically like the Chinese version of Facebook, Amazon, and
The Beatles, right?
PayPal.
Right?
Uh,
Oh,
well,
okay.
I'd said this deal would be like the Beatles
Oh,
signing a deal with Spotify and Amazon and uh, uh, iTunes all on the same day. Which
wow.
maybe some people are like, well, we don't like Spotify. It's like, okay, well, regardless, you can't disagree with the fact that they're going to make a lot of money from partnering with this company. And the game is League of Legends is huge in China. It's huge, and so the game, yeah, essentially is aimed, in my opinion, which I think is pretty spot on. Is not really aimed at the Western audience. It's aimed at folks here in China who really like MOBAs, and Tencent is a massive, massive Chinese tech company who will help them distribute and make Pokemon popular here in China. Pokemon didn't come to China, at least through stuff like bootlegs, but the first mainline game that came to China was Sun and Moon. Um, so it's
Oh,
relatively
wow.
so it's not huge here. It's certainly not like it is in Japan or America. You still see Pikachu plushies and stuff at the mall, which are probably bootleg as well. But this is the Chinese economy is on track to be the biggest in the world, past the United States in about 10 years, probably even faster with the way things have been going lately. And
Hmm.
it makes sense that Pokemon Company would want to get big in China. That they stand to make a lot of money. They could possibly double their revenues in a number of years just by aggressively marketing themselves in China and doing it in partnership with Tencent and with a MOBA, which is a popular genre in China. Makes perfect business sense. And I'm sure most of the actual resources like developers and all that are actually being handled by Tencent. So it seemed like a lot of people online were like, we got this instead of Diamond Pearl remakes, or
Right.
instead of something else. It's like, well, like it's almost completely different people who are handling it. And I really don't think this is going to slow down the production of mainline games. You can just kind of pretend like it never happened if you want. And it's not gonna slow down Diamond Pearl remakes. I'm sure they're still in the cards, and it's not like you're getting this instead of Let's Go Johto or Diamond Pearl remakes. And
Right.
basically, it's a game for the Chinese. Of course they're gonna do a big worldwide release because of course they want to make as much money off it as possible. They don't want to say like, oh well, y'all aren't going to like this. You in America aren't going to like this game, so we're not even going to like make an announcement in America. Of course they're going to market it to everybody, but it really is created for the Chinese market, and it's a smart move from business perspective. I know a lot of fans aren't happy about it, but they're going to make a lot of money with it. So it is what it is.
Well,
And
well, I think you make some really good points because it's so easy to be mad at a trailer when you just knowing that it's a Pokemon game, but I think when you hear everything you just said, it's kind of like, oh, okay, like like you're kind of, because I too was, again, I was pretty disappointed, even though I don't even have a Switch, um, but I was pretty disappointed myself. But when you came out with that post and you explained everything you just told me, I was like that makes sense, and that if anything, that's good for them. Like the Chinese market, that they're getting a, well, everyone, but that they have something directed at them to get them hopefully on board with other Pokemon games too. Um,
another thing, I know a lot of people don't like Tencent because they don't like League of Legends, or they don't like microtransactions, or they don't like the idea of like a massive foreign tech company getting involved with Pokemon. And that's a fair perspective. I should also mention that I use WeChat. WeChat is how I pay for everything. Everyone uses their phones to pay using Tencent apps in China. It's how I message everybody. It's how I send my wife text messages. Their apps are how I video. They basically have like a Chinese version of Skype. It's how I call my parents back home. It's basically, I use something kind of like a Chinese Facebook called WeChat. Yeah, it's a massive, massive company, and the way it works in China a lot of time is you have to partner with a Chinese company to get into the Chinese market. So I think some of this has actually been slightly changed as a result of the recent kind of trade war that Trump initiated. But this may have just very recently changed somewhat as far as the laws. But basically the way it works is that if you want to do business in China, you've got to partner with a Chinese company. So like when General Motors or Ford wanted to come sell cars in China, they had to partner with Chinese automakers and joint ventures, and say like, okay, well, we're making a new company that's 50% owned by Ford and 50% by this Chinese car company, and we're going to together make automobiles and sell them in China. It's not like in America where you can just, Ford can't just come to China and just start manufacturing and selling cars in China. They've got to partner with a Chinese company. And so that applies in this case as well, both kind of legally and practically, that if the Pokemon company wants to be successful in the Chinese marketplace, then they need to partner with a Chinese company, and they've done so with the largest Chinese tech company, which is, whether you like it or not, I mean, they kind of had to do it if they want to, compete in the most lucrative market in the world, or about to be. So it's just the reality that's, if you want to sell widgets in China, you've got to partner with a Chinese widget company. You can't do it on your own. So
well,
that's the way it is.
I mean, the way I look at it is, if the Pokemon Company can start getting more fans from China, which would also increase how much money they make, and this is just my opinion, but if you can get more fans, that means you can get more money, and if you can get more money, you have more available resources to make better products. Not always, but sometimes. And so my hope is that once hopefully Pokemon Unite does very well in China, and then hopefully, and every other places too, of course. Um, hopefully what that essentially will do is that will allow the Pokemon Company to. I know recently. I don't know too much about it, but I know that recently, um, the Pokemon Company described how like, at least during the production of Sword and Shield, like many of their co-workers were kind of like being overworked a little bit. I mean, it's just a rumor. I don't know how factual it is, but obviously, you know, having more money will hopefully help their, because the Pokemon Company is the largest selling video game franchise, I believe. Like they have the biggest like
They're the largest multimedia franchise in the world. Yeah, I
right.
think there are more actual Mario video games sold, but when you take into account movies and merchandise and all that, yeah, Pokemon's bigger than Star Wars. They're bigger than Mickey Mouse. They're bigger than Mario. They're the biggest. Yeah, number one.
Right, which is incredible. So my real hope is that with Pokemon Unite, it definitely will allow them to share all that great merchandise with China and other markets, and we can kind of get resources and fans from China, and that we can engage with them. And I think it'll. I agree with you in the fact that I think it's a smart marketing decision as well.
Well, here's something to consider. Take this for what it's worth. This is just my perspective as a, who I am and where I live. I'm not a business analyst, but kind of look at this from two different aspects of this. One is that I kind of feel like Game Freak doesn't like to do a lot of outside hiring. For example, Sword and Shield, they are the biggest multimedia franchise in the world, and Sword and Shield, I think most people's opinion is that it could have been of higher quality.
Right.
Despite all the money they have, I think they tried to do everything with, for the most part, their team, which is grown over time, but still, they there was a lot of problems that I feel that they could have just thrown money at it and fixed the problems by bringing in more people, but they didn't. But something else, so, as far as like, well, if they've got more money, they can make better games. That's true to some extent. I feel like they don't fully take advantage of that situation as well as they could. But something else to consider is that, Nintendo owns a large chunk of, the Pokemon franchise is like 33.3% owned, split between Nintendo, the Pokemon Company, and Game Freak. And Nintendo also owns, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but they also own some of the shares that belong to the other people as well. So I think Nintendo owns basically about 50% of the Pokemon franchise, something like that. So they're stand to make a lot of money as well. So while maybe Game Freak isn't the best at, using all their money to maybe make the best products or, kind of syncing that up, Nintendo is. And if they're going to make billions of dollars off of Pokemon Unite, that they do have a better track record of putting resources to good use. And, it could be that Pokemon Unite ends up getting us, Pikmin 4 or something.
Right.
That money ends up, we won't see it. People won't connect the dots and think like, oh, well, that Pokemon MOBA ended up getting us, Pikmin 4 and Metroid Prime 5 and this and that and some new, video games that we wouldn't have got otherwise. They're never going to come out and say like that money directly went to this, but it likely will allow them to give us some things that we want as a result of Pokemon Unite being a thing.
Right. No, and that's another good way of looking at it too. Yeah, no, that's awesome, especially when you put it like that. Because I would love Pikmin 4 or Metroid Prime 5. Like that would be amazing. All right. Well, Lava, I think that answers almost every single question I have for you. I have one more last question. I always like to end off on a lighthearted note. What is your favorite generation of Pokemon? And I know this always causes controversy, so you know, take it. People who are listening, take it with a grain of salt because everyone's favorite generation is different. But Lava, what is your favorite generation of Pokemon?
Well, it's kind of an unconventional answer, but maybe. But I've really love Fire Red, Leaf Green, and Heart Gold, Soul Silver. They're both, yeah, the Gen 1 and 2 remakes are both just really good. And, it's hard for me to choose between them, so I'm just going to say both. Both those sets of remakes.
Nice. All right. I like it. Um, all right. Well, I think that sums up our interview and our discussion. Dr. Lava, thank you so much for joining me. Real honor to have you. Um, and yeah, guys, I'm going to link Dr. Lava's social media links in the description below, as well as other links like his website and his Patreon. And yeah, I think that's it. All right, guys, take care.